Hey guys, John V here from PhoneArena. Right now you're watching our video comparison between the Apple iPad mini with Retina display and the 2013 edition of the Google Nexus 7. So with the holidays right around the corners, those who are looking for a compact sized tablet will no doubt think about these two tablets. They're the biggest noisemakers in the space, obviously. This year's iPad mini is graced finally with a Retina display. Beyond that, it's treated to all the usual hardware upgrades. At the same time, it has a revamped iOS 7 experience. Still, the iPad mini is going to see some heated competition against the Google Nexus 7, which is really impressive for its price point, especially when you factor in the high-end specs it's packing along. These two have very different looking designs from their choice of materials, their construction, and their sizes. It's quite evident that one has a little bit more of a premium edge versus the other has a more modest look. For starters, the iPad mini with the Retina display has the more luxurious look to it. That's thanks in part to its brushed aluminum casing, which is a staple of the iPad in general. Now it gives it an added sense of sturdiness and strength and still maintains a very nice streamlined profile. But the thing is, it's a wider tablet, so it requires more stretching with our hands. Whereas with the Google Nexus 7, it's narrower, so it's a lot easier to hold with a single hand. It doesn't have the premium edge just like the iPad mini with the Retina display, but it still has a very modest and humble design that's very nice for its price point. You have the soft touch matte finish, which gives it a very nice clean appearance. It's made of plastic, so it's lightweight, still streamlined, but obviously from a visual standpoint, the iPad mini with Retina display just still seems to capture our attention just a little bit more. It was a long time in the making, but the iPad now has a Retina display to compete with all the higher resolution panels out there. As for the Google Nexus 7, it continues to push forward by offering even a higher resolution screen than its predecessor. So what we get here with the iPad mini is a larger 7.9-inch Retina display, which is an IPS LCD panel. The resolution stands at 24:8 by 1536, giving it a pixel density count of 324 pixels per inch. Meanwhile, the Google Nexus 7 is outfitted with a smaller 7-inch IPS LCD panel, and its resolution stands at 1920 by 1200 pixels, so a little bit better than 1080p, giving it a pixel density count of 323 pixels per inch. So the pixel density advantage might go to the iPad mini with Retina display, but honestly, our eyes don't notice any difference between the sharpness and clarity between the two, as they're able to deliver some crisp looking text even in the web browser. So the viewing angles and the brightness output are pretty much identical with these two devices. So as far as outdoor visibility is concerned, there's not one that really outclasses the other. But we do notice that the color reproduction on the Google Nexus 7 display is a lot more vibrant when compared to the subdued tones on the iPad mini with Retina display. Take a look around their trims, they pretty much feature the same ports and buttons. So they include things like their power buttons, volume controls, 3.5mm headset jacks. The only thing that's different here is found with their power connections. We have the Lightning docking port on the iPad mini versus a more traditional micro USB port on the Nexus 7. For being tablets, they both offer some better than average cameras. So they're both 5 megapixels in size, they have 1080p video recording, and they also pack a long f2.4 aperture lens. When it comes to storage options, you get a little bit more variety with the iPad mini just because it's available in 16, 32, 64, and 128GB configurations, whereas with the Nexus 7, it's only available in either 16 or 32GB. When it comes to their software experiences, being new tablets and all, they're treated with new software updates. So with the iPad mini with the Retina display, it is packing the new iOS 7 experience, while the Google Nexus 7, we just got the update for the Android 4.4 KitKat experience. Honestly, the visual presentation is going to come down ultimately to personal preference. You get a more simplistic UI with the iPad with Retina display versus the Google Nexus 7, which has a lot more personalization with its various home screens. With the iOS 7 experience on the iPad mini, it's a refreshing change here just because it's now outfitted with a new design language, and we can see that right away with how it has a layered design. On top of that, they utilize these really neat looking translucency effects in different areas. On top of that, they also have some really cool animations and transition effects that really liven up the platform. What we like about the Android 4.4 KitKat experience with the Nexus 7 is that it's a lot more straightforward compared to before. So it kind of follows the same premise with iOS, where it's more of a simplistic experience than anything else. But on top of that, you still have a finer level of personalization with the experience here. For the most part, notifications are handled in the same manner with both experiences. So all you gotta do is just swipe down from the top down, and what we get here is their respective notifications panel. It's nice that everything's in one central and unified area, but with the Nexus 7 and the Android experience, it's nice we were given some additional secondary functionality. For example, being able to reply to emails and even sharing different stuff all directly from there. Meanwhile, multitasking is pretty much on the same level with both. So with the Google Nexus 7, you have the multitasking menu here, which you can quickly jump in and out of different applications. And with the iOS 7 experience, with the iPad mini with Retina display, what we could do here is several different things. We could do a swipe up gesture with 5 fingers to get to the multitasking window. And again, just like Android, we could jump in and out of different apps. Or to quickly navigate, which we really appreciate, using the swipe method. With the updated software experiences on these two tablets, we naturally see some enhancements made to the respective digital personal voice assistant services. Siri on the iPad mini with Retina display, and of course Google Now with the Google Nexus 7. But between the two, we still favor the Google Nexus 7 and Google Now just because it's just a lot more aware about our surroundings and provides us with more relevant data than its counterpart. Even though the gap has closed considerably over the last year or so, we just still constantly find that apps tend to be a little bit more polished over on the iPad versus Android as a whole, and we see that in several different applications. But the other thing worth pointing out is that we have a more diverse ecosystem of apps that are tablet optimized for the iPad mini versus the Google Nexus 7. Despite that, we just have a higher level of gratification with the Android 4.4 KitKat experience on the Google Nexus 7. Now, we might not see them all right away, but there are just some additional features like tap and pay, wireless printing, and even this one here, the ability to actually have several different users on the tablet that really deepen the overall experience, really adheres to power users. And this is just one neat feature that's not available with the iPad mini. You're going to get the best experience using the portrait-style on-screen keyboards with both tablets just because they're very spacious and we don't have to stretch that much with our thumbs, whereas with their landscape options, it just feels a little bit cramped typing normally. Now, between the two, just because the Google Nexus 7's display isn't as wide compared to the iPad mini, we just have an easier time compensating the entire layout with our thumbs. But regardless of that, the two are pretty good just because they are very snappy and responsive. And on top of that, if you want the iPad mini, you can go with the split style option. Not surprisingly, the web browsing experience is fantastic with them just because they feature the same performance. So you have speedy page loads, fluid navigational controls, and instant page rendering. But we do find the Chrome browser to be a little bit more useful than Safari just because you have secondary features like being able to switch between the tabs, which is great. And on top of that, it offers just a little bit better sharing functionality. Likewise, we like how the Nexus 7's Gallery app provides us with some very useful editing tools on the go. So we have things like different filters we could apply, which is the same thing that we could find with the iPad mini and iOS 7, but we just have a little bit more control in terms of adjusting things like exposure, contrast, shadows, and stuff that the iPad mini doesn't offer. We don't find one music player to be better than the other just because their presentation and their functionality are pretty much identical to one another. Now, as far as audio quality, we're going to give it to the iPad mini just because its speaker is placed on the bottom edge, so it's a little bit better in terms of dispersing audio as we're holding the tablet, just because with the Nexus 7, its speakers are placed towards the back. Usually it's having the larger display means you get a more ideal video watching experience, but seriously, the size difference between the two is almost negligible, so it doesn't really matter just because the two displays are sharp and they're able to actually play videos with a lot of finesse and ease. Now with the Google Nexus 7, we just like it that we're able to actually copy videos over relatively quickly, whereas with the iPad mini, we just need to convert them before they're able to be played. There really isn't anything extraordinary with their camera apps. It's nice that we can jump right into them even in the lock screen, but they're pretty much slim when it comes to manual controls and even shooting modes. With the iPad mini with Retina display, we have either the photo mode, we could set on HDR, we have video mode, and a square photo shooting mode as well. Meanwhile, with the Google Nexus 7, it's outfitted with things like a panoramic shot view, you have the photosphere option, and you have just a few different controls you can manage. For example, you can adjust the exposure and even modify the white balance. They're outfitted with pretty much the same camera gear. 5 megapixel autofocus cameras which feature f2.4 aperture lens. Now honestly, it's a close race with their still image quality, especially outdoors. They take some average looking details, though when it comes to color reproduction, depending on the angle, sometimes we see more of a saturated look going on with the iPad mini with the Retina display. When it comes to macro shots, it just seems as though the Nexus 7 is a little bit more equipped at capturing some of the finer details. We noticed that, but at the same time, we just noticed that its shots tend to be a little bit more over sharpened compared to the tones put out with the iPad mini, but nevertheless, they're both fantastic for the occasion. We also favor the iPad mini when it comes to low lighting quality. Now, the Nexus 7 benefits by having a longer exposure, so it actually has a brighter looking shot over the iPad mini, but it comes at the expense of sometimes blurring the shots. It's more prone to it, and at the same time, it just seems to be a little bit more over sharpened with its details, so it gives it more of a painted look. And you could tell as well with the Nexus 7, there's just a lot more noise in the shots, so it really diminishes its quality more than the iPad mini. It's a narrow win for the iPad mini when it came to still image quality, but for 1080p video recording quality, it's just a huge win for the iPad mini, blowing away the Google Nexus 7. Now, the biggest thing here is just the crisper looking details put out by the iPad mini's quality, whereas it's a lot more flatter in tone with the Nexus 7. Nexus 7 also has several different distracting elements in its quality. For example, it has some artifacting elements that pop up when we're panning very quickly. The audio is a little bit sharp with it, and its exposure seems to be a little bit more sensitive, so it kind of jumps in and out to different levels. In our experience, we get better battery life out of the Google Nexus 7. When full charge, we will get close to 2.5 days of normal usage, whereas it's only a day and a half with the iPad mini with Retina display. Now, as far as power usage is concerned, we're just thankful that we're able to get at least a solid day out of both of them. So we've seen how these two tablets stack up against one another. Now let's talk about pricing. As we know, the iPad mini with Retina display sees an increased price point from its predecessor. Instead of $330 like last year, it's now priced at a staggering $400. In comparison, the Google Nexus 7 is a lot more favorable for those who are more budget conscious, just because it has only a starting price point of $230. So with that in mind, we're going to recommend going with the Google Nexus 7 just because you're going to get a lot of value out of that package. So you're going to get high-end specs combined with a low price point and a very deep Android 4.4 KitKat experience. It goes to show why it is the head turner in the space right now. The iPad mini is a strong competitor, of course, but at $400, it just doesn't seem like as good of a value compared to the Nexus 7. So if you guys want to learn more about either tablets, you can check out our website, PhoneArena.com. It's John V. Thanks for watching.